The crack of a sniper's rifle is unmistakable. Its sound is a whisper of death carried through the wind, yet it lingers in the air long after the bullet has hit its mark. But what happens when the shot never finds its target? When the best of the best miss, time and time again? What if the solution to the problem doesn't lie in experience, but in something else entirely? If you're intrigued by stories where the rules are broken and the unexpected happens, then like and subscribe, because this one might just surprise you. The day felt like any other in the heat of the desert, dry winds sweeping across the open training field, carrying dust and a promise of sweat that clung to every inch of exposed skin. The sound of boots crunching against the arid ground blended with the low hum of distant chatter. The SEAL snipers stood in a row, their eyes focused intently on a distant target, an impossibly small bullseye at the edge of a jagged rock formation 1,000 yards away. These were men who had trained for years, honed their craft in the chaos of real-world operations, and survived it all. No challenge was too great, no target out of reach. Or so they believed. Each sniper, tall and muscular, adorned with the heavy mantle of experience, took his turn. The moment the first shot rang out, the air seemed to thicken, a silence creeping in where there had once been noise. The impact? A clean miss, a thud of dirt, the target untouched. The second shot came with barely a breath in between. Another miss. It was met with a mixture of disbelief and growing frustration. The third came, then the fourth, each shot landing off-center or falling short. The tension began to build, rippling across the sniper team like a wave in an open ocean. Their pride, always unshakable, was starting to crack, and for the first time in ages, doubt began to creep in. Not a single bullet had met its mark. Standing at the back, arms crossed, a woman watched, her figure blending in with the dusty landscape. Abigail Hayes, standing tall with a quiet, calculating presence, was hardly a figure that would have drawn attention in any other circumstance. Her blonde hair, pulled back neatly under her tactical cap, framed a face that was calm, almost too calm. She was a civilian, no uniform, no visible rank, but her eyes were sharp, trained to read the situation with precision. She wasn't here to participate in their drill. No, she had something else entirely in mind. As the SEAL snipers lined up for another round, the man who led the team, a grizzled veteran who had spent over a decade in the field, turned to her. His face was hard, frustration visible in the furrow of his brow. "Abigail," he called out, his voice filled with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "You're up next." The challenge was simple: hit the target. Abigail didn't waste a moment. She didn't fidget with her gear or check her rifle like the others had done. There was no need. She had already done her homework, had already mapped the shot in her mind. She had lived for moments like this, when the odds were stacked against her and the expectation was low. She knew what it was like to be underestimated, to be viewed as the outsider, the one who didn't belong. But today, this was her moment to prove that underestimating her would be their greatest mistake. She stepped forward, moving toward the rifle set up on the firing line, not with the brash confidence of a showman, but with the quiet composure of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. The weight of the SEAL sniper's eyes pressed on her, and though she was used to being watched, the energy in the air was different this time. There was no camaraderie, no silent understanding. It was a challenge. They wanted to see her fail. They needed to see it, because anything else would shatter their world of certainties. Abigail didn't flinch. Her movements were slow and deliberate, as if the world was in slow motion around her. She adjusted her stance, dropped her bag to the ground, and crouched next to the rifle. The wind was light, almost imperceptible, but she could feel it whisper against her face, just enough to make her aware of the variables. Her fingers, sure and steady, moved over the rifle with practiced ease. No fumbling, no second-guessing. She looked through the scope, lining up her shot with surgical precision. The SEALs watched her, their faces unreadable, their patience running thin. The first shot was quiet, almost imperceptible, but for those who were paying attention, the sound of it was like a knife cutting through the air. It was over before anyone had a chance to breathe. The sniper team, caught in the weight of their failures, couldn't help but watch the target. They squinted, almost willing it to move, but it didn't. Abigail stood slowly, her face unreadable. She didn't need to look. She knew. The target had been split dead center. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The air held its breath, and time seemed to slow down. The SEALs stood frozen, as if the world around them had been turned upside down. Their pride, so unshakable before, had been crushed in a single shot. No one had seen it coming. Not them. Not even Abigail herself. It was a perfect shot, a testament not just to her skill, but to the quiet, unassuming precision she had honed over the years. Abigail glanced over her shoulder, meeting the eyes of the lead sniper. He was still processing what had just happened. There was no smug satisfaction in her face, no gloating. Just the calm, unwavering confidence of someone who had done what others couldn't and knew why. Her focus had never wavered. She didn't aim at the target. She aimed at the space where it was supposed to be, a calculated calculation that came from years of training and experience. She turned, walking away from the firing line, as the SEAL stood there, still processing the impossible shot. For Abigail, it was just another day, just another challenge. But for the men who had doubted her, it was a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. The hum of anticipation in the air was palpable as Abigail prepared for the second round. The SEAL snipers, still reeling from her first perfect shot, shuffled slightly, their stance less assured, their eyes now focused with an intensity that hadn't been there before. The desert stretched out in front of them, the horizon shimmering in the heat, but none of them could tear their eyes away from the woman who had just shattered their expectations. She hadn't said a word, didn't need to, but the message was clear. She wasn't just here to observe. She had come to show them how it was done. Abigail crouched by the rifle once more, a machine of focus and intent. The others stood in silence, a mixture of awe and disbelief still hanging in the air. The lead sniper, a veteran with the weight of countless missions behind him, wiped his brow, his eyes flicking to his teammates. He had seen good shooters before, but none who had walked in and done what Abigail had done so effortlessly, without fanfare or flourish. With a sharp intake of breath, Abigail looked through the scope again, her steady hand positioning herself just right. She had done this hundreds of times, perhaps even thousands. But this time, it wasn't just about hitting the target. This was about proving that it wasn't just skill that made a good marksman. It was something deeper, something beyond the mechanics of the shot. It was knowing the moment before it arrived. It was understanding the variables, the wind, the terrain, the subtle shifts in the air. The SEALs had been trained for this, but Abigail's mind moved with a different rhythm, one that saw the shot before it was even taken. The target, still at 1,000 yards, had remained untouched by the snipers before her. They had taken their time, adjusting their scopes, recalibrating their aim, but none had even come close. And here she was, with the entire weight of the field watching her. If she missed, even by a fraction, it wouldn't just be a failure. It would be a statement, one they would all take to heart. The pressure was mounting, but Abigail didn't feel it. She felt the familiar calm, the sense of clarity that always enveloped her when she was in the zone. With deliberate precision, her finger found the trigger. Her breath, steady and controlled, did not falter. The shot rang out, cutting through the silence like a whisper, a single thread that connected her to the target. The sound of it was sharp, but it felt more like a breath of wind than a crack of gunfire. She stood slowly, almost disinterested, her eyes locked on the target. The snipers watched the target carefully, every eye trained on it, waiting for the confirmation of success or failure. The distance was deceptive, the terrain shifting beneath them. The SEALs were used to these shots, used to dealing with the elements. But this was different. They hadn't expected this kind of quiet from her, this serene composure. It was disorienting. The ground felt too still. And then, with the faintest flutter of the wind, they saw it. The target, split clean in half. Her shot had been perfect, the mark untouched by any of their previous failures. For the second time, Abigail had done what none of them could. Hit the target, dead center, with no hesitation, no second guessing. There was no cheer, no applause. Just a sharp intake of breath and the collective realization that they had just witnessed something rare. Something that wasn't about muscle or machinery, it was about the mind. About understanding the subtlety of a moment and seizing it with unparalleled precision. The lead sniper let out a low whistle, his mouth dry. "Damn," he muttered under his breath, but the words carried, and the others nodded in agreement. They couldn't deny it any longer. Abigail hadn't just come here to show them how it was done. She had come here to teach them. But still, It wasn't just the shot itself that was important. It was the way she had approached it, like the target was already in her grasp before she ever pulled the trigger. It was in the quiet confidence that radiated from her as she walked away from the firing line, the rifle still smoking gently in the heat. The SEALs exchanged looks, some of them unable to hide the admiration creeping into their expressions. Abigail's calmness, her ability to remain composed and unflustered under pressure, was a far cry from their own instinct to tense up, to fight the environment. She wasn't like them, and yet she had outperformed them in their own game. As she passed by the group, she didn't slow her pace. Her gaze never faltered, never wavered. It was as though the moment had already passed, the challenge met and conquered. The snipers, on the other hand, were still digesting what had just happened. They had been humbled, not by a woman who had somehow defied the odds, but by the simple truth that sometimes true expertise didn't look like what they had imagined. No, it wasn't just the rifle or the gear. It was Abigail. It was her, and the knowledge that set her apart. They had trained their entire lives to be here, and yet, one quiet shot from a woman who wasn't even wearing the same uniform had left them questioning everything they thought they knew. Abigail Hayes had not just hit the target. She had struck at something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface. And though she would never say it out loud, she had proven that sometimes it's not about the weapon you wield. It's about knowing exactly how to use it. The tension that had held the training field in a vice grip slowly began to unravel, but the SEAL snipers remained frozen, their eyes locked on the woman who had just taken them by surprise. The echoes of the shot still seemed to hang in the air, as though the world was processing the impossible. A single shot, perfect, clean, dead center, had shattered their expectations. For years, they had prided themselves on their skill, their precision, and their unshakable belief that no one could match them. But now, in this hot, dusty desert, in front of a group of their own, their pride lay in tatters at Abigail Hayes' feet. Abigail didn't wait for their praise, nor did she seek validation. Her only acknowledgement of the moment was a brief, almost imperceptible glance at the target, where her bullet had sliced through it like a surgeon's scalpel. She didn't even need to look for long. She knew. She knew before she pulled the trigger that the target was as good as hit. And as she stood up from her crouch and began to walk away, she left the stunned silence in her wake, unaffected by the whispers and looks she knew were following her. The snipers, however, couldn't move. The scene felt suspended, as if time itself was waiting for the next step. The lead sniper, a man in his late 30s with a weathered face and an air of authority, blinked slowly, breaking the stillness. He was the first to speak, his voice hoarse, as though he couldn't quite find the right words. "You're damn good," he muttered, his expression a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Abigail didn't pause. She simply nodded, her gaze steady, her movements fluid as she walked away from the firing line. The SEALs, still reeling from what they had just witnessed, couldn't help but watch her, each of them struggling to come to terms with what had just unfolded. She hadn't just hit the target. She had demolished their assumptions about what made someone a marksman, what made someone worthy of respect in this field. There was a strange humility in the way Abigail carried herself. No boastfulness, no swagger. She had done the impossible, and yet she was as calm and collected as ever. She wasn't here to prove anything to them. She was here for herself, and perhaps, in some small way, for the years of being dismissed, for the underestimation that had dogged her every step. It wasn't about the title, the uniform, or the rank. It was about knowing who you were, and knowing exactly how far your skill could take you when you trusted yourself enough to take the shot. The lead sniper, still standing there with his rifle cradled in his arms, turned to his men. There was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a spark that told them he had just learned something invaluable, something he couldn't ignore. "She's not just some outsider," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "She's a damn good shot." The other snipers exchanged uneasy glances. None of them had seen it coming, not like this. They had assumed, just like everyone else, that Abigail was nothing more than an outsider, a civilian, a woman. In their eyes, she wasn't supposed to be a threat. But now, that assumption had been shattered, leaving nothing but the raw, unspoken truth that their pride had been outmatched by someone who had refused to be overlooked. A few moments passed before the lead sniper spoke again, this time with a hard edge to his voice. "She's got something we can't teach," he said, still trying to grasp the full scope of what had happened. "Something we don't have." The others nodded silently, and though no one said it aloud, the truth was evident to all of them. They had been bested, not by a superior weapon, but by a superior mindset. Abigail's calm focus, her ability to block out distractions, to ignore the pressure that had steadily built among them, was something that couldn't be taught. It was something you either had, or you didn't. And Abigail had it in spades. One of the younger snipers, still processing the weight of the moment, finally spoke up. How did she do it?" His voice was a mix of awe and confusion. "I mean, we're SEALs. We've trained for this our whole lives. And she just nailed it." The lead sniper shook his head, a rueful smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "She didn't do it like we do it," he said. "She saw the shot before it even came up. No hesitation. No second guessing." His eyes narrowed as he thought back to the moment she had taken her shot. It was like she knew exactly where that target was going to be. She was already there before the rifle even fired. The others stood silently, their respect for Abigail growing with every passing second. The realization was dawning on them, a quiet understanding of the depth of her skill. They had expected her to fail. They had been ready to write her off, to dismiss her as another outsider who didn't belong. But Abigail had made them see, truly see, that greatness wasn't about fitting in with the crowd. It was about excelling in ways that others couldn't even begin to understand. As she made her way off the range, her steps measured and unhurried, the lead sniper finally broke the silence. "She's not just a shooter," he said, his voice filled with newfound respect. "She's a force." No one spoke after that. It wasn't necessary. The truth had already been laid bare. Abigail had walked in, done the impossible, and walked away again, leaving behind a group of snipers who had just witnessed something extraordinary. The training field was quieter now. The weight of their failure was still heavy in the air, but it was tempered by the understanding that they had just witnessed a master at work. The SEAL snipers, some of the best in the world, had been outclassed, not by a better rifle or more advanced technology, but by a mind that saw the shot before it was ever made. Abigail Hayes had proven that sometimes the greatest weapon wasn't the rifle or the scope, it was the mind, the ability to think clearly under pressure, to trust your instincts and your training. And in that moment, that quiet moment where the target was split in half, they all knew one thing. They would never, ever underestimate her again.